Good morning, everybody, and hello. So we're 2 minutes late, so we're running the tiniest bit behind schedule. I'm sure we'll catch that up. But good morning, and welcome to another of SustainIt's bite-sized breakfast briefings, which is a name that doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but there we go. So this is, I think, now the 5th in our series of bite-sized seminars talking about issues regarding sustainability, CSR, and specifically CSR sustainability data. So today we're going to talk about materiality, and specifically we're going to talk about materiality in regard to GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. Obviously, one of the big things that came in with G4 reasonably recently was this requirement to focus on materiality, and so we want to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to introduce to you now my colleague Matt Whitney, who will say hello, I'm sure, any second now.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Matt. I'm the person who's been communicating with you guys to get you involved in this webinar. I've been with SustainIt for just over a year, helping with new business generation, account management, and some marketing bits. So yes, welcome.
So Matt will be doing most of the talking, but as usual, for anyone who's kind of been to one of these things before, you'll be well aware that I just can't keep my mouth shut, and I will chime in. Right. So to tell you a little bit about me, as well as Matt has done his side of it so eloquently. My name's Joe Jones. I am the principal sustainability consultant and main tea drinker here at SustainIt. I've been with the company now for just past over the 6-year mark. And yeah, I tend to have a lot of fun drinking tea and telling people what I think too much. So that's me. So there we go. So Matt, if I hand over to you, and we can make a start.
Good stuff.
So I think the first thing that I wanted to mention is we're going to talk about materiality, as we've said. We're going to talk about what, why, and how is a lovely way of putting it. I think what's quite handy at the moment is that 2 degrees are actually doing quite a lot of work in a similar vein. I assume you all know who 2 degrees are. But they're also heavily focused on materiality at the moment. So you've got kind of 2 slightly different views of the same issue, which I think is quite useful. I do think that it's a very good illustration. Materiality is on a lot of people's minds right now. And so I think what we'll do is we'll talk to materiality as part of the discussion of sustainability reporting. We'll talk about how it ties into the wider discussion of CSR. We'll talk about the importance of GRI and those things. But yeah, it's nice that at the moment you're able to kind of reach in and out of more than one place, for want of a better term. There's quite a few sources of knowledge on materiality, which is good. I know Radley Yelder as well has done some interesting stuff on it in the last year.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I don't know if you are. So we'll start off with what?
So we'll start off with the what of materiality. So what is materiality? What does it mean? And what is a materiality assessment? I'll be brief on this bit because I think most people on this call have probably already got a good idea of this. So it means relevant or important. The GRI define material topics as those that have direct or indirect impact on an organisation's ability to create, preserve or erode economic, environmental or social value for itself, for its stakeholders and for society at large. As I say, essentially it means important or relevant to the organisation. Materiality assessments were designed to reduce the complexity of reporting indicators listed in the GRI's sustainability reporting guidelines. Materiality has been an aspect of financial reporting for some time now, and as sustainability reporting is rapidly assuming more and more significance, it's good that the concept is now being applied in this arena. Essentially, materiality is a great way to help identify and prioritise the issues most important to stakeholders and the issues most relevant to your company.
Yeah, so as I warned you, I'm going to jump in. One of the interesting kind of problems that G3 had was that it was possible to pass it by using the more equals better approach, which ends up sounding quite Welsh, and I apologize for that. But there are quite a few examples. I mean, the one I came across was we'd seen a few GRI submissions, and I'm a bit big enough nerd to actually read these things. There's often a question who reads sustainability reports. It's idiots like me. But where we saw certainly one where there was an insurance provider. They were based entirely in kind of Western Europe, and they submitted a GRI report, and it was full of things about human rights. It was full of things about working conditions. And I think, yeah, these aren't the kind of issues that really affect you. And that, I think, is what they're doing. I think when GRI updated the boundaries, there's two things they really want to do. The first one, which I think is probably the most important overall, is a massive simplification of the reporting requirements of CSR managers. If the framework you're working to only states that you've got to report on the stuff that has a measurable impact for your company, then it does a great job of shallowing the pool in terms of the data depth you need to go to. You only need to collect and report on the stuff that's important. The second rule is that it does combat that more equals better mentality. Naturally, if a company's going to do GRI, if a company's going to do anything, they want to be very good at it, so they want to get the highest rating possible. G3 was open to gaming of the system. You were rewarded for reporting more, not necessarily for reporting better. And so I think that's why materiality is so important to G4, and I think that's why materiality is now something that's so important across sustainability reporting. It's a great way of establishing that what you're reporting on is highly relevant to you, which we see is a very important thing. Matt, back to you.
So I'm sure this image will be familiar to you. It's our mocked-up version of a Materiality Vigil, designed to show quickly and clearly which issues are to be considered material. The x-axis in this instance is increasing relevance to the company, and the y-axis shows increasing importance to stakeholders. Therefore, those aspects that are higher up and further to the right are those which are to be considered more material. In this instance, we've varied the size of the dots to represent data availability as well. The bigger the dot, the more data is available for that aspect, or KPI. To make it easier again, what we've done is shaded the KPIs according to their priority. So the darker the KPI, the higher the priority. Of particular interest, I think, are the KPIs that are of high importance to only one group of stakeholders. It's also worth spotting that you will inevitably come across KPIs that you have loads of data for. I'm thinking about that big blue dot in the middle at the bottom there, but they just aren't important enough to your company to be considered material. So yeah, just because you've got the data, it doesn't mean that everybody wants to see that data. So we've briefly dealt with the what, now for the why. Why should you conduct a materiality assessment? Well, as has been stated, if you want to produce a report that adheres to GRI's G4 framework, a materiality assessment of some sort must be undertaken. Materiality is also an element in other reporting frameworks, notably SASB, DJSI, that's Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and the IARC, which is the Integrated Reporting Council. However, materiality shouldn't be considered simply a tick box exercise. Done properly, we believe it should add real value to your company's sustainability strategy, not just to enable you to achieve a certain level of report. I don't know if you want to say anything on that, Joe?
Yes, I do. I just need to find my mute button. So I think, as Matt has said, I think he's very right to say it, more and more reporting frameworks now require that you do some form of materiality study. And I think it's an increasing trend that it can't go away. As we talked about already when we talked about the what is a materiality study, it answers so many questions in terms of helping you understand what data to report, in terms of helping you define what are the important things. More and more sustainability reporting is going to require that everything that you report, every data you collect, is done in consideration of this materiality assessment, because people want to make sure that you're reporting stuff that's important to you. Matt, back to you.
Thank you. So, to reduce reporting burden on sustainability professionals, the GRI has introduced this framework to ensure companies are only reporting on the aspects that are most relevant and important to them, as we've said. This is to ensure that any sustainability communication produced by a company gives an accurate reflection of how that company is performing in the areas that are most, to use the word again, relevant or important to its operation. This has the added benefit of meaning you no longer need to collect data and report on 140 plus KPIs and produce a sustainability report that's 120 pages long and no one will read. It allows you to focus on what is important, to make sure the big issues do not get lost amongst the noise of the rest of the less important performance indicators.
I'm going to jump in again, because, again, I feel like I'm restating some of these things, but I think it's important to be really clear about this. CSR report frameworks are growing fast, both in terms of the number of companies that are producing them, and in terms of the number of pages they contain. So CSR reports are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They're getting really big. But by making sure that your reporting has got a clear framework, defines, and, if we're honest as well, limits the required reporting metrics, then you can produce a more concise and, probably more importantly, a more focused CSR report. I mean, if it's worth remembering, and we'll still talk about GRI from this regard, that just one GRI KPI, and you can look at some of the environmental stuff, will inevitably need data from 5 or potentially even more feeder KPIs, for want of a better way of putting it. So, and if you're reporting on 20, then 20 times, it grows exponentially, and it grows very, very fast, and you've got to have all that data, and so a report goes from being something that's reasonably small to being a behemoth before you can do anything about it. So anything that can be done to keep a report on track, I think, is really useful. And I put down a term in my notes here, which is the KPI burnout, and I think it's reasonably accurate. But KPI burnout is most definitely a risk, both for the producers of the CSR reports and, probably more importantly, for the consumers of CSR reports as well. You don't want people to spend hours reading hundreds of pages if it doesn't actually mean anything to them or to your business.
So conducting a materiality assessment can also help you to identify risks within or threats to your organisation. During the course of a materiality assessment, you'll be discovering, or more likely confirming, the aspects that are most relevant to your company, those that have the biggest ability to affect your company or its stakeholders. SustainIt suggests performing a gap analysis, post-materiality if you like, to discover which of the material aspects you are doing particularly well on and which require more work. This is great, as it brings materiality from simply being a tool used for a certain take on reporting to becoming a strategy defining tool. The outcomes of this gap analysis will show you where your processes and programs need tightening up to drive forward sustainability change. It is also good to know what has been successful in the past. In this light, the materiality assessment can be seen to help you make the business case to senior managers for why you need to spend on certain parts of your work.
But unsurprisingly, I'm not the biggest fan of sustainability as a compliance exercise. I think, and to be honest, I often say quite loudly that sustainability should be about change and about social impact rather than about ticking a box or limiting a liability. But that's not to say that understanding risk isn't an important part of sustainability. And the materiality, I think, there's no denying that it can be very, very helpful in that process.
So once the case for materiality has been won, how does a large organisation go about actually defining what is material to them? First off, you need to identify the topics or indicators that will be considered within this. Most of these may be obvious to you, but it's worth looking externally. Have a look at what competitors are reporting on, for instance. Also of interest might be SASB, which I mentioned in passing earlier. They're, for those of you that don't know, they're a US-based organisation that produce sector-specific guidance on what metrics should be deemed material. Their take on materiality is a little more prescriptive and needn't be followed to the letter, but could give some good ideas. They've only produced materiality matrices for a few industries or sectors at present, but more are to follow and shortly. So this is definitely one worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I think very quickly on SASB, Matt's absolutely right. I mean, for those of you who don't know, they are a framework. They've got Bloomberg on the board of directors, I think, but certainly he's involved, so there's no denying that there's a financial clout there, and they are certainly pushing very hard to be the preeminent reporting framework in the US. I think how they're doing it is quite complicated, but certainly how they're doing it as well is very interesting. When it comes to go back to the identifying topics, I think this is something that gets very interesting very fast, because you're now talking about an engagement piece. You're talking about finding what's important to your internal stakeholders and finding out what kind of information is available. So finding the flow of the data, getting information coming to you as well as going out. We've always talked extensively about the importance of data and about sustainability as a two-way street. But once feedback is gained from stakeholders, they have to be given something in return, and whether that's an acknowledgement of their contribution, kind of a touch base just to show that this is where they fit into the overall materiality, or whether it's some way of returning to them the data that they're giving in a way that's useful to them. It's about that feedback, because materiality is great as a starting process, but it's the starter to a longer process, and the more you can keep the people who've engaged with you at that point invested in your overall sustainability, the more interesting and, to be honest, hopefully easier life is going to be as you go on and you start to dig deeper into the kind of information you need.
So having identified some topics, you need to analyse their significance, both to the stakeholder groups and to the organisation itself, so both internal and external. When assessing internal significance, you'll want to ask such questions as, is that topic a major challenge to your sector? Does your organisation have the ability to influence performance in that aspect? Does it present a significant risk to your organisation? Then when looking at an aspect significant to your external stakeholders, you will need to engage with parties such as your customers, shareholders, NGOs that are active in the field, legislative bodies perhaps, and questionnaires, roundtable discussions, social media, forums like 2 Degrees, crowdsourcing. All of these could be considered as routes to that engagement. One output of this piece of work may be one of the materiality maps or matrices, an example of which we gave you earlier. Something worth mentioning actually about these maps is that there's no formula for placing the dots. It's very much based on the work you've done and up to you, the sustainability professional, to interpret your findings and place the dot in the most appropriate place. I'm not aware of the existence of any pieces of software that will allow you to put in data and put the dots in the place for you. I think you just chuck them in where you think is most appropriate. That's my understanding at least.
Yeah, I think for me, there's, and at the risk of going into something that we've not talked about at all, but I think there's 2 words that I would use in terms of this analysis process, which is applicability and materiality. So when you start to set out what you're going to report on, and when you start to work out what, there's 2 questions. Does it apply, and is it material to your business? And I think I've run into examples over the years where sustainability teams haven't really considered both of these questions when they come to looking at what's material. So to give you some very quick examples, so if your company is entirely office-based, if it only operates in maybe continental US, and if you provide a service, then do you really need to worry about a lot of the human rights and accident metrics? Do you need to worry about workers losing limbs and things like that? Do you need to worry about access to healthcare? Does it? No, because those things don't really apply. It's not applicable. And then the same is true with materiality. So if you're for an airline, for example, and then just naturally 99 point something % of your entire environmental impact is going to be airplanes. It's going to have wings on it. So do you really have to worry about the CO2 impact of some small satellite sites that you just can't get data for? It'd be nice to have it, and I'm always one of those people who would argue to have as complete a data set as possible, but don't be afraid to step back and think, well, is this actually material to the business, or is it actually such a small part it's not worth the blood, sweat and tears that I'll need to get hold of it? It's always something worth considering. How important is a piece of data to the overall picture? Yep.
So GRI has changed the boundaries to include not only what's inside the organisation, but also what's outside. By this I mean excuse me, aspects that are outside of the organisation's direct control. Now this can present challenges to an organisation, as it's very difficult to know what's going on either upstream or downstream in your value chain. Factors related to suppliers of customers. This supply chain management is something we'll deal with in a separate bite-sized briefing, no doubt, as it's a whole other topic. And if you want to talk to us afterwards about supply chain data management, then please feel free to get in touch with one of us. But just worth considering that within GRI, this upstream and downstream aspects are now to be included within the work, within the reporting boundaries.
Yeah, I am under strict instructions not to talk about supply chain at this point because we're only allowed half an hour and not 5 hours, but definitely it's an interesting challenge, and it's one that we're looking to help a few of our clients with, and it's one I will talk about endlessly given the opportunity. So I'm not going to say anything about supply chain apart from that. So conclusions, because this is a half-hour meeting, it has to be brief, it has to be quite focused, and so we are pretty much at the end. There are about 5 minutes left for questions, so if you do have any, please use the chat function in your GoToMeeting sidebar, and we will get to the questions in a moment. So I hope that all of this has explained some of the mystery behind materiality. And for me, and I think it's important to be really clear about this, materiality can be a lot simpler than you think. I've had a lot of discussions over the last couple of years since materiality started cropping up that suggests to me that there is kind of this mythos around it, and it doesn't really need to be there. At its heart, it's about looking hard at your business and working out what is important to you, either for your internal stakeholders or for your customers. And both of those are things you should understand already. So making sure that sustainability strategy talks about those things shouldn't be a hugely difficult exercise. Time-consuming, quite probably, yes. But it is, in its essence, quite a simple thing. Like a lot of new pieces of terminology, materiality can seem opaque, but it really isn't. It's about sticking a flag in the ground and saying, these are the things that are important to us. And so for me, any sustainability report really can start with a good materiality assessment because it gives you an opportunity to define that. As we mentioned already, 2 degrees are already talking about it. Radley Elder did a nice piece last year about it. And a lot of this work says a very similar thing. Materiality is probably simpler than you think it is. Give it a go. And if you're struggling, there is all kinds of help available, either through webinars like this one, or through CSR communities like 2 degrees, or by paying consultants who talk too much, kind of like me, to come and lend a hand, and obviously we're always very eager to do that. So if I was to give you a few very quick points, I would say these are them. So Matt's in charge of the slides, hopefully there we go. So don't get distracted. You don't need bells and whistles when it comes to materiality. It's about what's important to you. It's not about a grand ambition of 3 years down the line. Next one. Make sure you stay focused on that top level of the graph. if we go back to that graphic we showed, don't spend time reporting against things that nobody cares about. Just because it's really easy to report on it, it doesn't mean it's going to add value to you, and it doesn't mean it's material. Make sure you stay focused on that top level. It's about what's important to you. And yeah, much like it was discussed when we talked about the transition between GRI level 3 and level 4, more and better aren't the same thing. Stay focused on the important stuff. It's no good reporting against everything if only 20% of it is important. And the 80-20 rule will, I'm sure, crop up as you start to kind of creep into this materiality exercise. There we go. We leave this slide in because we have to. I think if we take it out, I get told off. So, but we do have global experience of working with our clients throughout sustainability, all the way from materiality through to realization and quite mature reporting and system integration. So, last stage. Any questions? So this is again where you get to type into the GoToMeeting chat bar, and we will answer anything we can. Matt, I don't know if you've got anything.
Yes, so first question we've got here is how would you suggest a global organisation represents its issues on a materiality matrix when issues are more material in some areas than in others?
I mean, I'm almost tempted to kind of fly back to the graph. I'm not going to. It's an interesting one because I've always struggled to find a way to graphically represent materiality. The kind of the bubble graph where you've got internal and external stakeholders works to an extent, but essentially you're right. There are additional layers as well. It's just, I realize not so much an answer as a restatement of the question. From my perspective, you have to understand that materiality as required by GRI is about the global level. And that should be informed by the various spokes of the business. That being said, I think there's nothing wrong in having kind of highlights of this is important to this part of the business within that. It's a difficult one, and if it was an easy answer, then I wouldn't be talking quite so much about it. But certainly, I think one of the most interesting things about materiality is it gives you an opportunity to find those stories that are important to parts of the business and highlight those. I hope that answers the question, but certainly I think a very interesting one.
I think we've probably got time for one more question before we wrap up this session, which is, do you have any advice on internal stakeholder engagement?
Okay, so we've got 2 minutes to talk about that. Okay, essentially, the engagement piece is always interesting because it's about establishing the two-way direction to the flow. If information is a one-way path, then I think you will struggle with engagement. I think people naturally want to work for a business that takes sustainability seriously. There's been all kinds of research done there, and there's all kinds of foolish stuff saying that you can pay a millennial about 20% less if they believe in the company. And whether or not that's true or not, I'm not going to get into. But people want to work for companies that take sustainability seriously and take them seriously. If you have the opportunity to, and if the materiality exercise gives you the opportunity, you should definitely take it, to connect with those people who are internally important, say, look, this is where we want to go, what do you think? Then they become invested in that process. It's time consuming, undeniably, but it gives you that opportunity to get them involved. And I think that's the most important part of engaging with internal stakeholders, is making them see the value of their contribution to an overall thing that can have a massive impact on how a business works. How's that sound, Matt?
Fantastic. Great stuff. I think we have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this session. I will follow up with each of you after the session. I'll send through probably a PDF copy of the slides and also a link to our YouTube channel where you can see this webinar as well as all of our other webinars that we've done in the past, should you be so minded. Again, thanks very much for your attendance this morning. Hope you enjoy some of the sunshine that we're promised for the rest of the week, and yeah, hopefully talk to many of you soon.
For me as well, thank you very much. The one thing I would add is we are always looking for topics that people are interested in to talk about at these breakfast briefings. So if you have any suggestions, feel free to give those on to Matt as well. And yeah, have a lovely day, everybody. Bye-bye.